Hi everyone, it's William. This is the 1921 diary series, and I am making my second attempt at the moment because I did what I thought was quite a nice installment and then discovered that I hadn't pressed. There's this horrible fly. I hadn't pressed record. So, yeah, c'est la vie, I guess. Easy come, easy go. So, this is part 3 of the long diary entry for January 31st, or I should say it's written on January 31st. It's not describing the activities of January 31st, but giving an overview of 2 weeks of activities beginning in mid-January. And on the Western calendar, for just people are going about their daily lives in Paris, which is where Dmitri is writing, it's actually this 2-week period is actually the beginning of February on to the middle of the month, but Dmitri, for now, is sticking primarily to the old Julian calendar that was kept in Russia until the time of the revolution. Okay, so in that last diary, the last section of this diary entry and the previous section, Dmitri has been writing about the meetings that he's having with what he calls the Trepov group. So Trepov had been a prime minister of Russia, and before that the transportation minister under Nicholas II, and up until right before the revolution broke out, he was the prime minister, and so a very important figure, and was proving to be also an important figure in the Russian emigration in France. And he had this group of kind of political cronies, and they were, Dmitri describes them, without giving all the names, he describes them as being basically former government and court figures. And he's a little bit disgruntled. These are middle-aged men. He's about to turn 30, and his impression is that they want to, and they conceive of it as being possible, to return Russia to the way it was before the revolution, to the old regime, the way things worked, the way the government worked in the old regime. And they're all monarchists. And so at the beginning of this long diary entry, Dmitri has informed us that, as frustrated as he is with these guys and as sort of hopeless as he sees them because they're not sort of tuned in to what the reality is now in Russia, and how they need to work with that reality going into the future. So his frustration is, now there's a ray of hope for him, because he announces to us that things are finally starting to move. And now in this third section, he's going to tell us, going to begin to tell us, to explain that to us, how things are beginning to move, how there's sort of this ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds for him personally, because he's been so depressed and so discouraged. But now, now things are getting better. And in fact, I would say that he was guardedly really in his element, that he was now beginning to experience something that he'd always wanted to experience but hadn't been able to in Imperial Russia, despite being a Grand Duke, because there was no outlet for people who had political ideas or a vision for Russia's future that varied in any way from the emperor's political ideas and vision of Russian future. And as we all know, Nicholas was more or less a backward-looking person. The only time he enacted reforms, really, was when he was forced to do so, like immediately at the end of the 1905 revolution, when he signed the October Manifesto, very much under duress. allowing for there to be a Duma, a parliamentary body in Russia. And so Dmitry, as an adult, he'd been far more interested in political things than in military things. And he had really aspired to playing a concrete role in Russia's future and being taken seriously. And he hadn't been able to do that in Imperial Russia, and he hadn't been able to do it so far in exile. But things started to improve a little bit when he was included in this Trepov group, because here were these very important political actors who were coming to him and who were including him in their discussions and were acknowledging him as an intelligent man who, like them, was moderate, a moderate monarchist, and was open to modern ideas. So, okay, let us go right into that. Now things are moving ahead a little. To begin with, the Parisian monarchists decided to organize a club. And of course they were afraid to use the word monarchist, so they're calling it the Russian Assembly. Trepov is the leader of the undertaking. For the time being, this Russian Assembly doesn't have sufficient funds to lease a permanent space, so its members, who were elected, and I will be gathering on Fridays in a private room in a restaurant at 4 Avenue Victor Hugo, and there we'll have debates and discussions on monarchist political themes. I personally consider this undertaking to be a very good and constructive thing, but for the moment, the members of the Assembly are rather like the members of the old Petrograd clubs, divided amongst the Yacht Club, the New Club, and the English Club, and that's a pity. It would be infinitely more useful to organize the Assembly on a truly political basis and invite as many Russians as possible, like refugees, officers, etc. So, yeah, now we're talking. I'm impressed that is the attitude he takes. Let's see if I can offset the sunlight a little. I guess that's as good as it gets. Sorry about that. Yeah, he hasn't been rolling up his sleeves and going and meeting with refugees in the, in the remaining refugee camps. But at least he's thinking about now how they can be included, how ordinary people can be included. By ordinary, meaning, just educated, middle or upper class people from different backgrounds. Of course, he thinks of officers because that's his background, but then he includes the etc. at the end. What am I going to do about this? There's my great-grandfather's chair in the background that he made. Okay, so that, to my mind, I'm impressed by that. I'm sure, there will be scoffers among us, but I applaud his point of view with respect to that. So he's still worried about these guys being just like, the cronies who sat around in the clubs in St. Petersburg and then Petrograd. So the Yacht Club I've heard of. Anybody who's been interested in the Grand Dukes at all, or the Russian aristocracy, knows about the Yacht Club. That seems to have been the most prestigious one in St. Petersburg, and everybody who is anybody belonged to it, if you were male, that is, and Dmitry belonged to it. The other two, the New Club and the English Club, I can't say I've specifically heard of. My guess would be that Dmitry probably himself belonged to the English Club because he had so many English friends in Petrograd and in St. Petersburg, and they were mostly in the diplomatic corps, and they're people, of course, whom he meets again when he's in post-revolutionary London. But anyway, I know he was a member of the Yacht Club because he was spending a lot of time there after recuperating from this either real or psychosomatic illness that he'd had in 1915, late 1914, early 1915. when that period was over, and he returned to St. Petersburg in preparation to return to Stavka, the headquarters, where he'd be acting as a sort of adjutant to Nicholas II. He had some time in in Petrograd while he was he also had surgery while he was there. I say surgery, although there was no anesthesia. It seems to have been possibly a tonsillectomy. It was removing something from his throat that shouldn't have been there. And his sister, who had actually been trained as a nurse by now, a frontline nurse, she returned to Petrograd for the occasion, and she was the attending nurse who held his head still while the doctor cut whatever this was out of his throat. And he said it felt like his head was being ripped off, but anyway, that's a digression. So what he was doing before that surgery and after he had recuperated sufficiently was going every evening to the yacht club, having dinner there and gambling there. And so, yeah, in that interval between that surgery and when he went to headquarters, that was where he hung out. So, he was kind of a yacht club crony himself. But yeah, I mean, these were middle-aged men. Trepov was 50, and he was disturbed by the idea, apparently, that this was just going to be, an extension of one of the Petrograd clubs. But nonetheless, he's pretty enthusiastic about it. And so they have taken the name the Russian Assembly, although clearly it's not much of an assembly. I mean, it's it's a small enough group of people that they can meet in a private room at a restaurant. And in fact, I looked at Google Maps, and I looked at the street view for 4 Avenue Victor Hugo, and I was hoping I would find a restaurant there that had been around back in 1921 and in Jazz Age Paris, so I could go there myself next time I'm in Paris. But what I saw was that the ground floor level of this very beautiful residential building is actually at the moment boarded up, and there was no sign saying, what establishment was being renovated or would be moving into that space. So, yeah, unfortunately, that is not something that we can follow in his footsteps and go there. Okay, so they're going to be meeting in this private club, this private room every Friday, and Dmitry is going to be participating in those Friday debates and discussions of Russian monarchist politics. Maybe he seems to be a little annoyed that they haven't included the word monarchist, because after all, they are all monarchists, but maybe they were hoping to attract some more liberal, non-monarchist intellectuals or political actors. And, I would think that Dmitry would have welcomed that, but it is what it is. He was a little annoyed by that. That's all right. So the Russian Assembly, a very bland name. And there had been another Russian Assembly or Russian Conference at the end of 1918 that Dmitry wrote about in his diaries and that you can read about in other sources. And he had not been invited to participate in that. But this time he was. And this Russian Assembly must not have gotten very far, because I have been unable to find mention of it in other sources. But on the other hand, I haven't done, a meticulous search, so hopefully I can find out more about it. But, probably the best source of finding out about it is going to be through the very hard to access emigre publications, of which there were several that were published at that time, mainly in France. All right, so setting that aside for the moment, yeah, it's exciting for him. He is in our next video. We'll talk about how he himself decided to start a little subgroup of this Russian assembly and getting a small number of people to take some constructive actions themselves with him, directed by him, and then every Friday to go and report on that to the assembly as a whole, this little assembly. Well, I think Dmitry is accurate when he calls it a club. At that stage, that's really what it is. It's a political club, and so he will be reporting to them every Friday on the activities that he and his little subgroup are doing. So do come back for that in the next video. And yeah, this is exciting stuff for him and for me, because I'm very interested in this topic, and we'll see what happens with it between now and when Coco makes her appearance, because as I told you before, these things are actually, believe it or not, connected. All right, so I'll see you next time. Bye.